I think at some point everybody has dreamed of running, starting, and building their own supercar company. After all, Lamborghini and Ferrari did it way back in the day with very limited financial resources, and they've since gone on to blow up and completely dominate the supercar world. But unfortunately for you and I, building a supercar company isn't exactly financially feasible because it's really expensive. But for rich millionaires and billionaires around the world, it is something that can be done. But the thing is, it's a lot harder to build and fund a supercar company than you think. So I think it's time we take a look at some of the best supercars that failed that really shouldn't have because they were awesome, powerful, and just downright crazy. And what better place to start out this list than with the Dome Zero, which for those of you who played Gran Turismo growing up, you probably recognize this car, and it is one of the most ridiculous looking Japanese supercars ever. Dome really started back in 1965 by a gent named Minoru Hayashi who loved racing. Initially, they were just improving upon existing racing machines, such as the Honda S600 and S800, and gaining experience on what worked and what didn't work in racing. Fast forward up to 1975 and Dome was officially formed. And the idea behind it was to take what they had learned from racing and apply it to small batch production cars. And just a short 3 years after the company was officially formed, they had done it. Well, sort of. In 1978, Dome had officially unveiled their concept car, which was the Dome Zero, and they unveiled it at the Geneva Motor Show in 1978, which was then quickly followed up in 1979 with the Dome Zero P2, which was supposed to be the production car, which was then debuted in Chicago and LA. There was only one problem. The car wasn't approved by the Japanese government, meaning it failed some sort of safety or emissions testing, or one of the many tests that goes into getting a car road ready. Because of that, we never saw the Dome Zero P2 actually hit production. Dome, the company, is still around today. In fact, their website is still up, but it doesn't appear that they're doing much of anything, or at least it's not clear if they're really doing anything anymore at all. Now, the next car is another car you might recognize from some racing games that you played growing up, and that's the Cizeta V16T, and unlike the Dome Zero, this one actually made it to production, with a whopping 10 units produced worldwide. And what's really interesting about this car is that it was actually designed and built by a group of ex-Lamborghini employees, and the design itself was actually partially from the Diablo. They literally took the Diablo design and just changed it a little bit and then made it into that car. The Cizeta company was formed by ex-Lamborghini employee Claudio Zampoli and music producer Giorgio Moroder. This was after Zampoli had left Lamborghini and was running exotic dealerships on America's West Coast, where the music producer Giorgio ended up becoming a regular customer, and then that sprouted into their shared interests and then the formation of the Cizeta company. What makes the V16T so unique as compared to other Italian supercars of the time is the engine. Where most Lamborghinis and Ferraris of the time were using V8s, V10s, and V12s, Cizeta said fuck it and took it up another notch with the V16 engine. Normally with engines this large, it's common to see a multi-piece block, but in this case, it's one massive aluminum block. The heads, on the other hand, are a different story, as they're split in half with gearing to connect them together, so there's a total of 4 cylinder heads. The engine itself is actually heavily based on the Lamborghini Huracan engine, but basically doubled in length. When it finally came to market, the Cizeta V16T outputted an impressive 540 horsepower and was capable of over 200 miles an hour, ran 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, and had a big price tag to match at $650,000. The last car was built in 2003, as the cars are built to order and not manufactured without an order in place. While it's been almost 2 decades since the last one was assembled, the car is still theoretically in production and available to order, as per the company owner in a 2018 interview. That takes us to yet another Lamborghini ripoff. Sort of. This one's a little bit different, and this is arguably the best looking car on the list in my opinion, and that's the Vector W8. It's sharp, it's wild, it's crazy, and it flat out doesn't even look like something that would be legally allowed on the road. What's particularly interesting about this car is that it doesn't have fancy Italian roots like pretty much every other popular supercar. Instead, this one is actually American made. And while you might not think it's American made based on its looks, once you look under the hood, it becomes very apparent that it's an American car, as it's powered by a 6-liter GM V8, which was modified by Lotec and equipped with 2 Garrett turbochargers. Total power output was rated at 625 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque at just 8 psi of boost pressure. However, boost pressure was driver adjustable from 8 to 14 pounds of boost, with power output peaking out around 1200 horsepower when boost was cranked all the way up. Unfortunately, that awesome engine package was backed up by a rather underwhelming 3-speed GM transmission, which was previously found in the front-wheel drive Oldsmobile Toronado. While the design was absolutely incredible and the powertrain was really solid other than that terrible 3-speed transmission, They barely ever sold any of these cars, which is kind of surprising, with around 19 units produced throughout its production run. And it's cool to see an American car in the spotlight on the supercar stage, but obviously it didn't last because if you look at some of the reviews from back then, they were not so favorable on that car. And that takes us up to a car that I've always been very fond of, and that's a Consulier GTP. This company was started by a bond trader named Warren Mosler. And as you may have guessed from his last name, this is the same guy behind the Mosler MT900. But before Mosler was Mosler, it was Consulier Industries. What makes the Consulier GTP such an interesting vehicle is that it is literally the first ever, quote, production car with no structural metal. Instead, it featured a fully fiberglass monocoque chassis, which made it insanely lightweight for its size at around 2,200 pounds. For reference, that's similar to something like a Honda CRX, although I'd have to argue the CRX is the better looking of the two. Regardless of the GTP's very strange appearance, it was built to perform, with a Chrysler 2.2-liter turbo engine under the hood that was sourced from the Dodge Daytona. In fact, the performance of this car was so ridiculous that it was outright banned by the sanctioning body IMSA in 1991 for basically winning too many races. Mosler knew that the Consulier GTP was an absolute animal, and he took advantage of this by putting up a $100,000 bet to any production car that could outpace the Consulier GTP on an American track, and not to anyone's surprise, not a single person was able to get that money. With a 0 to 60 around 5 seconds and a 13.9 quarter mile, the Consulier GTP was well ahead of its time, especially considering it came out in 1987. And that takes us up to the Lotec C1000, which is not a production car by any means. In fact, it is a literal one-off car. So there's only one of them in the world. There's only one ever built, and they only ever plan to build one. However, it probably could have been successful if it was produced at scale, for the simple fact that it nearly had a 1-to-1 kilogram to horsepower ratio, something that Koenigsegg continued to pursue with their 1-to-1 car, except the C1000 nearly did it way back in 1995. This whole car was started as just an idea from one extremely wealthy businessman from the United Arab Emirates, who contacted Lotec, and he commissioned them to basically build him the fastest car in the world. Talk about a flex. About $3.4 million later, they had officially done it. The car was assembled and given to the customer. The car was designed and built with a full carbon fiber body and chassis to keep the weight insanely low at just 2,381 pounds, which is even more insane considering the massive 5.6 liter V8 from Mercedes in the back of it. Of course, a naturally aspirated 5.6 V8 isn't enough for a car this insane, so they strapped 2 Garrett turbochargers to it to produce an insane 1,000 horsepower. With that kind of insane power to weight ratio, this car was supposedly able to run 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds with a claimed top speed of 268 miles per hour, which is insane by today's standards, let alone 1995 standards. Hell, we didn't even see the McLaren F1 reach those kinds of speeds until 1998, which was 3 years later, and the McLaren only hit 240 miles an hour, not the claimed 268 that the Lotec was capable of. And again, because it was a one-off car, there's literally only one of them in the world. They only ever built one, but it would have been really cool to see a lot more of these on the road, and I think they actually would have quite a bit of success considering it's a pretty good looking car with a lot of power and very little weight, but unfortunately at a very high price tag, so kind of iffy on whether or not they would have ever actually sold. And that takes us up to what's probably the ugliest car on this entire list, which is the Lister Storm. While technically this car never died, because you can supposedly still order one and they'll build it, it's so ugly that no one has ordered one since 2007 were put together as per Lister's claims. Lister initially started as many of these supercar companies do, which is modifying existing cars to make them faster. For Lister, in particular, they built their company on modifying high-performance Jaguars by building crazy 7-liter 600 horsepower engines, which that engine then later became the basis for the Storm supercar. It's pretty crazy that they had the funds to develop a full road car considering they were making their money from modifying Jaguars, which is not a particularly big market. But regardless, they did it. Their Storm supercar featured an aluminum space frame chassis around the aforementioned massive and very powerful V12 engine with a 6-speed get-ragged gearbox behind it. The styling of the Storm supercar is, well, terrible. It's hideous. There's no getting around that. Nevertheless, it featured excellent engineering with a lot of aluminum and a lot of carbon fiber all throughout the body, and a strangely low hood considering it is front engine with a claimed top speed of over 200 miles an hour. Initially, they only built 4 road cars at nearly $270,000 or 220,000 pounds. After the road cars were assembled and sold, Lister then built 6 cars to compete in Le Mans racing and GT racing. Unsurprisingly, the early years of their racing weren't very successful, as the McLaren F1, Porsche 911 GT1, and the Mercedes CLK GTR were nearly unbeatable at that time. But once the rules changed in 1999, banning purpose-built race cars, Lister did see some success and won the FIA GT Championship in 2000. To be fair though, the rest of the field was mostly Dodge Vipers. The road cars were pretty far off from the race cars, as they were really heavy and not like kind of sporty in that way. And they were much more akin to something like an Aston Martin, where it was very luxurious while also being decently fast. And because of their low production, there's only 3 remaining units left in the world, at least as far as we know. And for those who have dreamed of owning an F1 car that was road legal, your chances kind of already came and went in the form of the Kapero T1. The company behind this car, Kapero Vehicle Technologies, was founded by a group of engineers who previously worked on the McLaren F1 road car. Their idea was to take what they knew as engineers and fans of Formula 1 racing and to combine it all to make what would effectively be the closest thing to a road legal Formula 1 car the world has ever seen. And you'd think that something this close to a legitimate race car would sell like crazy, but unfortunately it didn't really happen. The plan for Caparo was to produce around 25 cars per year and sell them, rather than building them to order, as many of the other small supercar manufacturers were doing. Unfortunately, they only ended up selling a grand total of around 15 or 16 of these little cars, and by 2015, the company had basically fallen into shambles, with the company owner showing up dead in a reported suicide. Regardless of the unfortunate ending of Kapero Vehicle Technologies and their company owner, the T1 was an absolutely insane performer. It's packed a surprising punch for such a small vehicle, with a 575 horsepower, 3.5 liter V8 that revved to over 10,000 RPMs, with a carbon fiber 2-seat chassis that weighed barely more than 1,000 pounds. It also featured pretty insane F1 style aero that generated as much as 1,500 pounds of downforce at 150 miles an hour, which is partially what allowed it to pull upwards of 3G of grip. All of that performance led up to the Top Gear showing, where they raced it around their racetrack, and to no one's surprise, it absolutely obliterated every other time of anything that they had ever tested on that track, but not without its issues, including the floor falling off at one point. You know that one company that is really well known for selling pianos and sound equipment, but also building motorcycles and helping automotive manufacturers develop their engines? Yep, that's Yamaha. And as it turns out, they actually experimented with building their own supercar in the 1990s, which was the Ox99-11, which is a pretty terrible name for a supercar. This is another car on this list that was heavily inspired by Formula 1 racing, and was really an experiment from everything Yamaha had learned in Formula 1 racing, which back then, they were the engine supplier for the Zack Speed team. But they wanted to do more than racing, so Yamaha set out to develop a car with any price tag they wanted. And by 1991, Yamaha had produced a singular Ox99 engine, and after going through 2 different designers/builders, Yamaha eventually took over the project and brought it in-house to their own subsidiary company. Because they wanted the car to be a 2-seater but with a narrow cockpit, they ended up with this incredibly funky tandem seat layout. In total, a whopping 3 units were produced globally, and it features a lot of aluminum panels atop a carbon fiber chassis with quite an ugly design if you ask me. The 3.5 liter V12 F1 engine in the back was detuned for road use, but still outputs a very respectable 400 horsepower, and the total vehicle weight came in around 2,500 pounds. With a claimed top speed of 217 miles an hour, which I personally have a very hard time believing would be possible with such a low power output. Unfortunately, the whole project was eventually scrapped, as there became apparently no upside or no way of actually selling these vehicles, no path to this project becoming successful, so eventually Yamaha ended up scrapping it, and that was the end of their supercar ventures. Moving to a different vehicle which did actually make it to production, let's take a look at the Venturi 300 Atlantique, which is an absolute gem of a French supercar. And had it actually succeeded in the long term, could have turned Venturi into something much bigger, but considering it's on this list, we know that it did never make it that far. Venturi was founded in 1984 by a pair of French engineers who wanted to build cars to compete with companies such as Aston Martin, Ferrari, Porsche, and so on. But they wanted to distinguish their cars from other supercars on the market with their special French touch. By 1987, they had the Venturi sports car, which at the time was a pretty impressive car, although nothing close to some of the other supercars we've gone over in this video. This car, as the name implies, is an evolution of the original Venturi. Interestingly enough, this little mid-engine French car features a turbocharged PRV V6 engine, which is an engine platform that was jointly developed with Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo. With that engine, it outputs a whopping 281 horsepower. And I know you might be thinking 281 horsepower is not a lot, and you'd be right to say that, because it's not. But this isn't the top speed type of supercar. Rather, it's more of something like a Lotus Esprit. A grand total of 57 Venturi 300 Atlantique supercars were produced, and although it's pretty rare, they are actually pretty cheap on the used market, especially for a rare supercar. Generally, these are pretty expensive, but this car in particular has popped up many times for anywhere from $90,000 to $110,000. And to be fair, Venturi sales as a whole, their entire company, not just this one car, they've reached over 700 units of sales in total. So it's not like they were an unsuccessful company. And they are still around today, but they're not really producing any sort of production cars. Rather, they're focused on EV technologies, motors, batteries, that kind of stuff. And for any Russian viewers out there, you probably recognize this car, which is the Marussia B1. Marussia was founded in 2007, and their B1 supercar was launched in December of 2008. And what makes this vehicle special is the fact that it is Russia's first ever supercar. The B1 in particular was their first car and the first of the B series cars, which really only consists of the B1 and the B2. Strangely enough, the B1 and the B2 are mechanically nearly identical, sharing the same engine, transmission, chassis, suspension parts, and so on. But from the outside, you'd honestly have no idea. The B1 looks like some sort of terrible Lamborghini ripoff, while the B2 looks like a uniquely designed car, although I have to admit it looks a lot like the Zenvo. Under the hood of the B1 is an engine from Cosworth, which is either a 3.5 or a 2.8 liter V6, depending on the options that you pick, with power ranging from 360 horsepower up to 420 horsepower. And they were able to develop all of this off of their experience from F1 racing, with an aluminum and carbon fiber shell. The idea behind this car was to focus on weight and handling over raw power. And while that's great in practice, the car ended up at 2,400 pounds, which is actually light by today's standards, but definitely a little bit on the heavier side as compared to other cars that we've looked at so far. Unfortunately, the company was eventually broken up, and there's been zero talks of them making a comeback in the world of road cars or F1 racing. This car I saved for last on the list because I have to say it is probably one of the goofiest looking cars on this list, and that's the Isdera Imperator 108i. Now, this is a German supercar that's actually based on the designs of a Mercedes-Benz concept, and more specifically, it's basically a direct copy of the Mercedes CW11. Isdera, the company, was founded by Eberhard Schulz, who was working for Porsche at the time as a design engineer. After Mercedes had unveiled the CW311, but never produced it, our boy here started his own engineering company, which was Isdera. And his plan was to produce the CW11 since Mercedes didn't plan to. As compared to the CW311 from Mercedes, the Imperator 108 changed very few things, but most notably switched out the flip-up headlights for fixed headlights and swapped the taillights for a different set from Mercedes. Under the hood was a Mercedes 5-liter M117 V8 engine, but it later featured the 5.6 liter and then the 6 liter AMG engines. By 1991, the car went through an update, which actually brought back the flip-up headlights. And don't get me wrong, flip-up headlights are really cool. I'm a huge fan of them on cars like the Miata and the 240SX and so on. But the thing is, I can't think of any other example where a car or a manufacturer started with fixed headlights and then updated the car later on to add flip-up headlights. I think this is the only example where they added flip-up headlights later on rather than removing them. Regardless though, production ended in 1993 with a grand total of 30 cars produced. Isdera went on to produce other vehicles, and as of 2018, they're mainly targeting the Chinese sports market with their newest cars, which might I add are very good looking cars, and I certainly wouldn't mind seeing them here in the States. So that's our list of crazy, weird, goofy, and kind of strange supercars that never really saw success on the big scale, but they were awesome. A lot of these cars were crazy powerful or super lightweight or just uniquely designed. Some of them were just flat out ugly, and it would have been kind of cool to see them go on, but nonetheless they did. If you actually knew about any of these cars, be sure to drop them down in the comments below, and if you think there's any cars I should have added to this list, definitely be sure to drop that down below too. While you're down there, get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. Check out some of the other stuff on the channel. Be sure to smash the thumbs up button because it really helps me out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.